Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. It is a pleasure to see so many of you here on a summer's afternoon. I'm sure many of you have got other pressing commitments and other pressures that are affecting your workload at the moment. So it's delightful to have you here to take a step back and think about how we can all implement change more effectively in our practice in our various contexts. We are delighted to have with us today Professor Jonathan Sharples. And in a moment, I will do an introduction. But before I do so, I'll just give you a brief overview of how this afternoon's webinar is going to work. I'm Nick Wallace. I'm the head of secondary English from English Mastery, and we are a programme with part of ARC Curriculum Plus. I'll do a brief introduction and then I'll hand over as quickly as I can to Jonathan, who will be talking about how to deliver and sustain a resourced curriculum. And at the end of today's webinar, I'll be talking about the 2022 English Mastery Research Trial, which we're running in partnership with the EEF, and to share information about how you and your colleagues may like to get involved with that. So that's all to look forward to. But before we get that, we're obviously going to dive straight in with Jonathan's session. And I have to read probably one of my favourite biographies I've ever come across in one of these sessions. So Jonathan is the Professional Research Fellow at the EEF. He's seconded from UCL Institute of Education. He works with schools and policymakers across the sector to promote evidence-informed practice and spread knowledge of what works in teaching and learning. He supports schools to scale up effective practices and is the lead author of the EEF's Schools Guide to Implementation, which we'll be discussing with us here today. Jonathan previously worked at, this is where things sit. If that wasn't interesting enough, Jonathan previously worked at the Institute for the Future of the Mind at the University of Oxford, where he was looking at how insights from brain science research can support teachers' expertise and professional development. Prior to this, he worked as a secondary school science teacher. If any of you have any questions for Jonathan in today, please type them in the chat and I'll fill them to him, and I'll fill them to them either as we go or towards the end. But without any further ado, Jonathan, over to you. And you'll need to unmute yourself if you could.
Look at that, it's taken 2 years and I still haven't found the unmute button. Hi everyone, and thanks Nick. Can I just share my slides? This one, okay. Can you see that fully?
Yeah, that's coming through. We've got it in our window view there, but we can see that.
Can you see all that?
Yeah.
Hi everyone. Yeah, and yeah, thanks as Nick said for taking the time to come out and listen to this. So as Nick said, I'm based at the Education Endowment Foundation and I'm seconded from UCL, and I kind of sit in the murky spaces between research, policy and practice. And recently, the thing I've been most involved with at EF is developing its work around implementation, which has been a really kind of fascinating piece of work. So what I'm going to do is we're going to give a bit of an overview, an introduction into some of that work, and particularly talk about a guidance report called the Schools Guide to Implementation. We can't talk about it all, there's a lot in there, but pick out some themes that are kind of particularly pertinent and try and frame a little bit the English mastery work in relation to that at the same time. As I'm going through, and if it's anything interesting that you put into the chat, Nick will pick it up and we can sort of stop and pick that up. If not, we can have a bit of a chat at the end as well. It might be useful just to say a little bit first about the EF and what it does. So the Education Endowment Foundation, it's the government's What Works Centre for Education, and I guess the idea is to try and provide this bridge between research and evidence and the people that need it, which are, you know, yourselves in schools essentially. And we go about that I guess in three sort of broad ways. First, we try and generate evidence by running trials and evaluations like that of English mastery to try and identify which approaches are showing the most promise in raising outcomes. We then synthesize those findings in the wider evidence base, so try and create an overview of what's effective and less effective. And then kind of my particular interest is then, well, having done that, how do you bring it to life? How do you bridge it into the real worlds of schools, and how do you kind of mobilize it, for want of a better word? And this work around implementation is relevant to all of that, but I think particularly fits in that. How do we mobilize that? It's pretty important. I think sometimes we get so involved in the mechanics and the details around evidence use that it's important to pull back and go, well, ultimately this is about providing educators with strong, powerful information to make decisions that inform outcomes for kids in schools, particularly pupils that are most disadvantaged. And I think that's ultimately our objective, is to provide and empower you as educators with the best information we can provide. And over the last 10 years, there's been a real kind of increase, I think, in the level of engagement and interest in evidence. This is some data from a survey that the DFE ran earlier this year, looking at sources of information that schools were using when deciding on strategies as they come out of the pandemic and they think about kind of recovering and moving on to the next phase. And you'll see there that guidance from the EF and sort of evidence resources are now featuring really prominently in the resources that primary and secondary schools are saying that they're finding useful and using. And that's a marked change from where we were 10, 15 years ago. So that's really it's really kind of exciting. However, there's a book coming, you can probably guess, but however, what we've learned, I mean, these are just quotes talking about our own evaluations. What we've learned is that that engagement and that awareness of evidence doesn't necessarily always translate into changes in action, and implementation is emerging as this key kind of factor in translating research into practice. And I won't kind of pull out all these quotes, but you see across, these are all EF evaluations, either of our own work or looking at EF trials, and you see the same features kind of coming out on the importance of implementation across that work. So that's why it was about 2018, I kind of sort of kick-started this piece of work to try and think about the processes of using evidence well, of implementing effectively, that complement the evidence that ES provides on practices, literacy, numeracy, and on programs, English mastery. So, so it's trying to think about, well, what are the right processes around professional development and implementation that are needed to be able to do something with that. So we wrote this guidance report originally with Bianca Albers from Centre for Evidence and Implementation, which was trying to unpack some of the steps around making and acting on evidence-informed decisions. So how do we identify priorities, select the appropriate approaches, plan, monitor, deliver the kind of some of this this work, and it's emerged as a kind of, chatting to Nick before, irrespective of what you're implementing on and whether or not that's a kind of something that you're taking from outside or something yourself. These are consistent, ubiquitous considerations about kind of making the right decisions and then making it stick. So yeah, I mean, just kind of overview of the report. The bulk of it is framed around the phases, these 4 phases of implementation, which I'll talk a little bit about in a second. But there are some themes that kind of cut across, that influence the activities across those different phases, but almost kind of sit as foundations. We've been calling them foundations for good implementation, and they kind of, they're the continual considerations that relate to it. So they're the kind of 2 main sections of the report, and we'll touch on those as well. This probably diagram has been the thing that I think people have found perhaps most useful, in that it starts to break down this overall set of considerations around implementation into something that feels a bit more actionable, if you like. I often describe implementation as the aggregation of lots of small things done well. it's not any single specific activity. It's about doing the right thing at the right time. And you start to see that playing out on a kind of image like this. So we won't talk about all of it, but just in terms of these kind of 4 phases. So this first phase, if you imagine you're starting at the top here, the first phase, explore, is predominantly around the decision-making process. So how are you identifying the right priorities, selecting approaches that are effective and relevant to those priorities, thinking about fit and feasibility. Then this next phase is, having done that, how do you line things up in such a way that you give your approach, the thing you're doing, the best chance of success. So that'll be about really planning really clearly, using that plan to build a real shared understanding of what's going on, assessing the readiness to deliver that plan, and then all the practical stuff around, training staff, building infrastructure, lining the kind of nuts and bolts up so that you can, when you start it, everything's in place. Then this kind of deliver phase, which is really about a process of continuous improvement. How do we deliver the approach in such a way that we can identify problems and solve them? How do we kind of build on initial training so we reinforce some of the changes in practice? And how do we grow the approach as we're introducing it? And then this final sustain phase is about kind of embedding it, sort of thinking potentially about scaling it, and sort of making it sort of really stick. I mean, there's lots to say, I guess, in relation to this, but I think one of the things that there's some features of this that I think are worth pulling out. One is that the bulk of this report relates to things that happen before anything is delivered. So the majority of the report covers things in the explore and prepare phase, and yet, I don't know, every organisation that I've been in and most schools, I think we tend to rush that because we feel this pressure to deliver quickly, and we all feel that it's ubiquitous. And I think one of the overarching takeaways of this is that I would suggest that the time spent exploring and preparing effectively, I would suggest, would pay dividends. That when you come to actually starting it, when you come to delivering it, I think you can save a lot of time and energy and effort and problems sort of that could have been preempted by spending more time in that kind of exploration and preparation phase. Easier said than done, I realise, but I think if you're thinking about English mastery, I think that's one of the things. I mean, and you're going to get you would get a lot of help from the program in relation to that, a lot more than some of these other programs we look at. But I think there's a lot of help there about getting things in place so that when you start to deliver it, it's got the best chance of taking hold. Okay, so the other thing just to mention actually on this is that we have to write things as a kind of set of activities, but in reality, of course, with a sequence, but in reality things don't operate in this neat logical sequence. And if you could treat this as a sort of set of concepts that do have a kind of natural sequence, but less rigid than perhaps is implied in this, I think that's helpful. It's not always possible to do everything here, and the best shouldn't be the enemy of the good. So it's a theoretical model, if you like. It's useful to kind of you'll be doing things in parallel, for example. It doesn't follow step 1, step 2, step 3, for example. Okay, so the first recommendation in this report is kind of what we've been talking about, which is the importance of treating implementation as a process, not an event. It's got a kind of rhythm, and there's a whole range of things going on. Allowing enough time, particularly to explore and prepare. I think inevitably this work perhaps leads you to doing fewer things better, and therefore we have to prioritize appropriately. I think we tend to all take on too many projects and underestimate the requirements of actually making something like this really take hold. So we've really got to be careful about the things we're choosing. Are they the right things for us? Are they signs that they're going to really have the impacts that we're looking for? And often the thing we tend to overlook is thinking about what do we stop doing to make the space, the time, the room, the resources, the energy to do the things that we're looking to do. And there's a whole kind of theme emerging around de-implementation. What do we do how do we kind of actively stop some things which might be worth thinking about as you're heading into this kind of project? That's the first foundation. The second bit looks at the kind of, if you like, the climate, the culture and climate within which implementation thrives or struggles. And I guess, that also touches on the role of leadership in relation to implementation. And my kind of sort of pithy take home with this is that implementation, I would suggest, requires both dedicated and distributed leadership. So the dedicated leadership is clarity from the leadership team about the vision and the purpose and the direction of travel and what we're looking for, about creating the environment where it's going to be conducive to good implementation. So where there's a sense of trust, where people feel they're open to kind of experiment and try things safely, and the sense of what I would call collective efficacy, which means that people feel part of the changes, not just a recipient of them. And it's not surprising that when those things are in place, implementation tends to go better than when it's a kind of top-down mandated decision where people feel disempowered. And for things like mass mastery, I think that's quite important, that people feel bought into and are contributing to the decisions and the way in which it's been implemented. And yeah, it's worth thinking through about how you can get that kind of involvement right. And yeah, and then the other aspects I think of dedicated leadership is not just people that kind of talk the talk, but actually walk the walk. And I'll come on to that in a second. There's a nice quote from Vivian Robinson that relates to that. So you've got dedicated leadership, but at the end of the day, this is a kind of joint endeavor when you're implementing something like English mastery. So we want distributed leadership where people are actively involved in not just doing what someone says, but are generating the insights on how implementation are going, that are part of kind of feeding into it, that are kind of feel as though they're able to kind of shape what's going on. And there's some evidence emerging around the role, for example, of implementation teams. So that might be a group with a kind of dedicated group with representation perhaps across the team with a variety of different skills, who are tasked with overseeing and managing an implementation activity. And that might be something that you might want to consider if you're thinking about implementing the change. And this is a nice quote from Kevin Collins that you can have the best plans in place, but the culture will eat that for breakfast at the end of the day. So it's really important to think about, have you got these foundations right in relation to the project? This was the quote I mentioned from Vivian Robinson, which I really like. And she talks about how building school culture is a practical endeavor. Trust isn't magically created in a vacuum then applies. It's a result of quality daily interactions, communicating clearly, delivering on the plans, making good decisions that people can see, walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And I think, one of the things I'm starting to realize is, yes, implementation, the climate and the culture really does influence how an implementation process can work, but it also works the other way. And that I've seen lots of examples now of schools who perhaps don't have that, using a good implementation process, picking a really clear priority and working on it in the right way with staff involved in it with the right way as a means to developing that culture and climate. So it's reciprocal, right? So you can think about how you can be using English mastery, and we're going to really do this well, and we're going to do it the right way with the right people involved, and through that we're going to monitor it, we're going to evaluate it, and then through that you can use it as a means to building culture, as kind of Vivian's saying here. It's a practical kind of endeavor. Okay, right, so that was the foundations for implementation. We're going to jump a bit because to some degree, the decision-making process on kind of doing English mastery, you hear you're kind of centering down on that as something to think about. there's certainly things to go and look at in relation to it in terms of the fit and feasibility of your context, and there's some stuff in the report that might be worth a look. But I was just going to jump ahead really to think about, having done that, how do we kind of really, what have we learned about how do we really prepare effectively? And in particular, how do we build this kind of shared understanding and buy-in about approach, which, you know, as we'll go on to discuss, it is turning out to be a really kind of key aspect, I think, about effective implementation. And then we're going to move on and look at a little bit about delivery as well.
Jonathan, you've put yourself on mute there. If you wouldn't be able to, if you'd just be able to start off from that side again, if that'd be right.
Hi again. Sorry, I managed to, don't know, I did that. So yeah, so let's assume now you're thinking, yeah, okay, this is something we're going to do. This is going to work for us. It meets our priorities. It's feasible. We're in a position where we can feel as we can get value of that. One of the key steps, I think, at that point is really working hard to get on the same page around the why we're doing it, what it's going to look like, and how this process is going to unfold. And what we're finding, I mean, this is a quote from Jake Anders, who did a review of all of the EF projects back in 2017. So we're talking about looking at 70, 80 projects, I think, at the time. And one of the things he was saying that almost all those programs could have worked harder to prepare the schools. There could have been more work and more time and more kind of concerted effort on the preparation. And actually, in particular, he said where there are problems of implementation, they often appear to a lack of shared understanding amongst senior leaders and teachers of actually what's involved. And I'm kind of see this happen all the time now, where there's almost this kind of convenient ambiguity, where if we leave enough space to sort of see into it what we want to see, we can all convince ourselves that we're on the same page, when in reality we're all something that's differently going on. And I think when whatever the thing you're implementing, really pinning down and really kind of focusing and ensuring you've got a shared understanding is, I think, is a really good foundation for thinking about kind of preparation. And one of the kind of tools and one of the methods that we've been using quite a lot with schools is a process of doing what we call an implementation plan. And there is, I mean, firstly, this is just one way of doing this, first thing to say. And secondly, the process of doing this is more important than the output. So the purpose here of doing an implementation plan is a tool to stimulate and structure your thinking and your planning. It's then a tool to support the actions that come out of that. And it's very much best done as a collective endeavor. This is a really good way of building that kind of distributed leadership and buy-in. And it's particularly valuable as a tool as a basis for kind of developing a shared understanding of what's going on. And there are other ways of doing it, but we find this useful in asking a series of questions. Firstly, why are we doing this? What's the problem or priority that we're looking to address? And how do we know that? And if you look at that explore section, that's really unpacking that. What data do we have that's, you know, informing our understanding of the issue? And ideally, what does that look like from different perspectives? Teacher perspective, pupil perspective, parent perspective, perhaps. Secondly, what exactly is the thing that we're introducing? What's the intervention or approach? And we'll come on to this idea of active ingredients in a minute as a means to try and distilling what exactly are we looking to introduce? How are we going to introduce it? What blend of different implementation activities and strategies are we going to draw on to make this happen? I'll put this up together because they're quite useful. And the last two columns work together. The last one, if you like, is, well, what's the ultimate objective? What are we looking to achieve? How will pupils, teachers, and the school benefit? But often what is missed is the stepping stones towards that objective. What are the implementation outcomes that are going to tell us that the approach is working or not? And what are they going to look like perhaps in the short, the medium, and the long term? what's the signs that we're moving in the right direction. And without that, it's very hard to kind of monitor the changes as they're occurring. So yeah, there's a series of questions that are kind of are quite useful to unpack. And schools, when they do these, they become blueprints and sort of living documents that can underpin a change. So this is one of our research schools, Durrington High School, and this is an implementation plan that they've created for introducing knowledge organisers, which I don't know a lot about, but it almost doesn't matter in a way, because it could be there's equivalent implementation plans for metacognition or phonics programs, whatever. But you'll see in it that they've in the left-hand column there articulated the issue or the priority in quite a lot of detail, and from different perspectives, from a teacher perspective, from a pupil perspective. They've then described the active ingredients. What are going to be the key features of knowledge organisations, organisers? And again, we're going to look at this in a second. They've then set out the blend of different implementation activities that they're going to be using to try and get this happening. And it's certainly not just one. There's a whole range of things that are going on here, which you can see there. A description of the short, the medium, and the long-term outcomes, implementation outcomes, and then an indication of what the ultimate objectives are at the end of it. And it's like anything, isn't it? When you see something that looks simple, almost, the more work has gone into putting it together. And yeah, these are living documents that have been through cycles of iterations with lots of people involved. But as I say, that process is a really valuable way of building this kind of shared understanding. So yeah, bear in mind that this could be something that could work for you as you're thinking about introducing English mastery in your school. Okay, so I'm just going to pick up this idea of active ingredients, which I've mentioned a couple of times. And perhaps because it is one thing that's conceptually a little bit challenging to kind of get your head around this on the report, this might be it. But it's one of the things that I think if you do really grasp, it can become really pivotal and kind of underpin a lot of the work. So by the active ingredients, in this case, we're talking about capturing what are the essential principles, practices, behaviours for the approach, the thing that you're looking to do. Or in other words, what are the key defining features of what's been implemented? And it's where you want kind of consistency. It's where what are the kind of things that, whether or not you're in this classroom or in a particular year group, what are the things that are going to define this approach kind of working well? And my colleague Lauren Randall came up with this nice metaphor of thinking about the load-bearing walls in a house. So obviously, in a house, you've got some walls that are structural, that are holding the building up, and if you took them out, the building might fall down, the structural integral. But there are other walls that are playing more of a kind of aesthetic purpose. They're separating up the space, and you can take them out and the house will stay up. So what you're looking about here, what are the load-bearing walls? What are the things that are holding up the thing? And if you remove them, you risk distorting it, if you like. And I think for me, without understanding where you want to be tight and where you want to be, where there's scope for flexibility, it's really hard to kind of communicate, I think, exactly what you're looking to achieve. And it's really hard, for example, to monitor them, because if you don't know what exactly you're looking to introduce, then how do you know, and what do you go looking for when it starts being implemented? So that's what we mean by kind of active ingredients. Okay, right. I don't know how long we've got. 15 minutes? All right, there's time to do this, I think. So, so we'll try and illustrate this. Let's just try and do this in the chat. If we were all together, we'd do it as a kind of in groups. But so what we'd have a think about is try and identify what you think the active ingredients of a bicycle are. And here's another nice quote from Susan Mickey that relates to it. So in other words, what are the observable, replicable, and irreducible components of a bicycle? All the things that you take it away and it's no longer a bicycle, and what are other, what are other things that aren't essential for it to be a bicycle. So just in the chat, go on, don't overthink this. Just put down anything that you think of it. There's no right. By the way, well, there are some right and wrong answers actually. Wheels, great. How many? 2. Yeah. Bicycle. Yeah. Okay. A pedal with a chain. Okay. Handlebars, some way of steering. Yeah. A frame. Saddle's always nice. Okay. A frame. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm gonna push back on the saddle. So have you seen those kids, down at the BMX park where they take the saddle off, don't they? Sometimes I've seen that, and they just ride around. I don't know, it must be exhausting, but they never actually sit down and they use. So is a saddle absolutely essential? Spokes, yeah. Okay, so what if we were doing this, and it's great, it works well in a group, and you can start debating out and discussing between, okay, saddle is an indulgent luxury item, yeah. Brakes, well, yeah, but you can't. Can you get a bike? Well, yeah, I wouldn't advise a bike without brakes, but yeah, maybe you could have one without it. Anyway, the purpose as you do this is you start to see that there isn't a kind of single right or wrong answer, but the process of doing it. Balance bikes don't have brakes. There you go. There are brakes. Yeah, there you go. Right. So you can see that through this process, you as a group could come up with some collective agreed description of what are the essential elements of a bicycle are. And in a way, it wouldn't matter exactly whether or not there isn't at that point a right or wrong answer, but the process of doing it would be really valuable, because then when someone says this, so let's say that then I create this thing and I go, well, is it then a bicycle? Like, or is it just some weird scooter? Like, this hasn't got pedals. It's a strange thing, isn't it, right? But if you'd come up with a set of active ingredients for your bicycle, you could make quite a quick decision on that. No, this doesn't work because it's not got this, or it's not got that. It's not got, or maybe it does. Maybe it's a form of a balanced bicycle, right? And so the point here is that by doing this process, you can build a shared understanding of what's going on, but you're in a much better place to judge whether an adaptation to that approach is what you might call critical. Has it kind of distorted the integral nature of what you're trying to do? So that there's all sorts of value to do it, but this feels for me is if you can't pin down exactly or in the right enough detail what you're looking to do, then it becomes difficult to actually. There's always this kind of convenient ambiguity about what's going on. Now, you're in a very, very fortunate position if you're talking about doing English mastery, because they've spent a lot of time thinking about these kind of active ingredients, and they call them, these 4 pedagogical pillars, which is a really good starting point. They're starting to pin down what are the active ingredients of English mastery. I think you could take these and unpack them further as well. I think you could take these and pin them down. If I was a school, I'd be thinking, right, I'd have a headline principle, and then I would go deeper in terms of what's this going to look like in terms of the consistent practices across our school, for example. And I've seen implementation plans that do that. They take this as a headline and then they set it out with a set of more fine-grained practices as bullets that illustrate that kind of high-level principle. But you're in a good place in that the training, the support has kind of structure that is based around a kind of shared understanding of what's going on. I don't know where they come from, but there's a real strength there, I think, in relation to that. Okay, we'll skip that. So that's really valuable. And having done that, that's what I was about to say in relation to that plan. So if you go back to that plan, they'll then start thinking, so you've set out a set of active ingredients here for knowledge organisers, and then there's a lot of thought thinking about, well, what then are the levers? How are we going to make that happen? And you'll see in this case, there's a whole range of strategies that they're going to do. And again, one thing I've sort of experienced is that people are happy to do things as long as they know clearly what's expected to them, what they're going to get in return, why they're doing it. And it's, again, the ambiguity that I think can frustrate people about it. So there's a template on the website that that is designed to help you think about that. So for a particular activity, let's say you're doing some training, or English mastery doing some training, there's value in setting out what's expected, time commitments, training commitments, follow-on support. What are you going to get? What's the support you get? And why we're doing it? What are the kind of, collective or individual sort of gains and rewards for doing it? And again, that's a kind of tool to try and build clarity and shared understanding. And this is all sitting in this kind of preparation phase, so that when you head off and do it, there's confidence, I guess, in the organization of the direction of travel. Okay, and then, so let's move to that then. So let's say that you're now moving into actually starting it. What are the kind of features of this deliver phase that are worth kind of considering? And I want to kind of flip this by thinking about how you learn new things as an adult. How do you implement sort of new skills and things as an adult in your wider life? So if you think about learning a new hobby, or learning a sport or an instrument, or learning to drive, when we start to deliver those things, we fully expect to be terrible. I mean, I've written, we don't expect perfection on the first time, but it's far even from that, isn't it? You jump in a car, you're going to stall 20 times before you kind of start to move, but that you're going to get better over time, and that you're going to adapt and learn as you go along, and you're going to value the inputs from an instructor or someone who's more experienced than you, who can provide ongoing inputs and coaching, and through deliberate practice and through monitoring it, you're going to get better. And it's almost, that's part of the joy, right? It's anything worth doing well is worth doing poorly, and that process of, we really embrace that process of going from being a kind of amateur and not very good to getting better. And yet in education, we sort of don't do that, right? We get people in a room, we run training, we tell them a bunch of stuff, and then we kind of just sort of either expect or hope that they're just going to be able to do it. And I mean, I'm over exaggerating, but there's some truth to that, isn't there? And what I think I find useful seeing this phase then is about that same process of continuous dynamic improvement. And therefore in this phrase, it's about supporting and motivating colleagues to keep trying, to keep going. If it's difficult, then particularly more experienced colleagues, if you've had people that have been got very clear ways of doing things, it's quite a challenge sometimes to be trying a different strategy or a different approach, and people can feel uncomfortable with that. So it's about supporting and motivating them. It's about identifying and solving problems around implementation, of which there definitely will be. There's just will be. So let's almost expect that, and sort of, look for that. But you can identify and solve and identify solutions within the organization to help solve those problems. There may be some person who's got it moving well, so let's use that to help, where there are challenges. It's about building on initial training with follow-on support and coaching and mentoring, and helping people embed the things they've learned in training. And yeah, it's about this process of learning and adapting. And leadership in relation to that is, I've kind of covered some of this. It's about actively supporting, encouraging that process of continuous improvement. And as Vivian Robinson said, it's not just about standing on the sidelines. It's about kind of walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And I think particularly what I've seen is the role of leadership at this point is about keeping the main thing. And inevitably, new things come on, and sometimes they are inevitable. Changes in COVID, you've got to do things. But there's something I've seen here where leaders are kind of really clear that we're going to work on this for a collective amount of time, and I'm going to kind of ensure that we're going to really keep going with this. I think there's something that I see that quite a lot, irrespective of what's been implemented. I could give you examples of that. I think there's a value about kind of being an active participant in enabling people to keep improving. And in that context, so if you frame implement delivery as that, then you have to monitor it, right? So if monitoring is a process of continuous improvement of learning and adapting, then the only way in which you can learn and adapt is finding out what's working and what's not. It's you know, the learning to drive thing. If you're not getting any feedback on how it's going, then how do you know what to improve? So I mean, I won't, not enough time to sort of drill into it now, but I think, you know, the case for doing lots of monitoring needs to be made for schools, because we're all trying to monitor and evaluate and stuff. But here, it's the role of monitoring is about gathering the insights that are going to be essential for ensuring that it's going well. And yes, that's around fidelity and are the active ingredients actually emerging, but it's also about whether or not people like it, whether or not they think it's feasible, whether or not it's, you know, they might be doing it, but it might be just really hard. So you also need to gather in those insights, because they're key to maintaining and growing the implementation of the approach as well. And yeah, and then final, I always end up skating over this because it's always at the end, but on thinking about sustaining it, I think one of the kind of risks is that sometimes we think about this too late, and really the considerations around sustaining an approach really should be made sort of earlier, and thinking about, and this is where the distributed leadership can come in useful, because, you know, if you've got one person who's been involved in English mastery training and they leave the organization, then suddenly, you know, you're left exposed, I guess, in terms of your knowledge of it. So it's about planning and thinking about that from the outset, and kind of continuously acknowledging and supporting good implementation practices, and not just assuming that because you might have got it working well at one point, it will always retain that. You know, it's an active process to keep doing that. And again, I think an implementation team here can have a really valuable role in an ongoing, you know, role in implementation. And then there's some interesting stuff around scaling up, you know, like what might have worked to get it working in one department or 1 year group might not be the same as what's needed to get it working at a bigger scale or in a different context. So it's important to sort of treat that scale up as in itself almost as a new implementation process. Okay, so yeah, so we've covered quite a lot there, and I guess introduced some themes and concepts really. So hopefully we've persuaded you that implementation matters, and, you know, the practitioner is the intervention, right? You know, that's ultimately what it comes down to. Trying to treat implementation as a process that needs time, especially around these exploration and preparation phases, the benefits of dedicated but distributed leadership, and of having a really clear, logical, and sort of well-specified plan that is used as a tool to build shared understanding, to structure thinking, and to support the actions. It's a live thing that's used, right? And then within that, the value in trying to specify the elements of the approach that you think are going to be absolutely critical to its success, the active ingredients, and then this notion of trying to treat delivery as a kind of learning process in itself. So there's lots more in the report, but I thought, you know, there's some sort of useful themes that you know, will relate to English mastery, but hopefully have wider kind of relevance to what you're doing and trying to introduce in schools. Should just say that there's a whole bundle of tools and resources and checklists, and if you're not tired of listening to me, there's some videos of me sort of talking about some of this stuff again, and a whole range of different things. And also to say that we're in the process of updating. So Jamila, my colleague's on the call, and we're right in the process of thinking about an update to the Schools Guide to Implementation. So we've got, you know, plans to kind of keep evolving and developing and improving this, hopefully, which will be coming later this year and early into next year. So yeah, watch this space. And if you want to, the best way is just to sign up to the EF's newsletter, and all new resources and new opportunities come through that. So you're probably aware of that already. Thank you. Yeah, that's my email address. If you want to drop me a line, and my Twitter handle. I don't use it a lot, but yeah, if there's new things, then I'll push them out through there. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jonathan. As someone who's getting a building project done at home at the moment, and as an avid cyclist, a couple of the metaphors you used there were really, yeah, really apropos. And I wonder if I can ask you maybe one question about what you were speaking about. One of the key things, the key message that you gave through time and again was the importance for school leaders to de-scope, to afford their colleagues the chance to actually adopt these new practices. And to do that, they need to be granted some time. If you're a school leader and you're trying to make those tough decisions around what to prioritize, what to take off your colleagues' kind of plates, what kind, when you've been working with teachers and school leaders, what are the kinds of things that you hear they decide, you know what, we're going to just take that off as a work stream?
I mean, it's almost, I mean, there's so many different things that you could stop, and I think what you might de-implement would be really down to your understanding of what is and isn't working in your context. That sounds like a bit of a fudge, but that I didn't really get into the explore phase, but that's really what that's about. It's about looking at current practices and understanding, you know, what are the kind of high leverage priorities. It was a bit of a kind of a jargony phrase, but what are the things that are going to get the biggest traction? And really spending time to understand why. You know, what data do you have in the school that tells you that, you know, and trying to be more objective in understanding, you know, the barriers to the direction you want to head in. But that, you know, that might lead you in very different places. You know, like for one school there might be an issue on, you know, understanding and implementation of phonics. For another school it might be something else. But that said, there are consistent things that we do which aren't as evidenced as, you know, they might be. And you know, we spent a lot of time, I think, sometimes on things that perhaps don't have the evidence base. And again, EF can help here. You know, like you know, there's a period for a while where we were doing lots of triple marking, like really kind of marking, you know, and the evidence was that just didn't warrant that level of kind of revisiting it. And you know, and so there's some useful stuff there. You know, you don't need to do that, I would suggest. I think you can save time and energy and effort by you know, doing the right types of market practice, and crucially, obviously, is what pupils do with that feedback that's the most important thing, not so much what teachers do. And so there are things that I think that we can look at to think, actually, is that actually as effective as it might be? But yeah, ultimately, I kind of sort of the school's got to work it out. But I would, you know, for something as big as English mastery, and something that, you know, it's a big commitment. I think it's a whole, you know, it's an extensive commitment. I think spending that time to really think about, right, are we in a position where we've got the right space, the time, the motivation to enter into this, I think is really going to be really key for you. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you as well for framing so much of the session around a programme such as English Mastery. There are other programmes you may decide to implement. I think there are, I don't know of any, but very helpful, I think, for hopefully colleagues in this call to understand it through that lens. I'm now going to talk you through, thank you for those of you who are sticking around. If you do have any questions for Jonathan, you'd be happy to fill them in the chat. That'd be very, very kind of you. I'm now going to spend a few moments sharing with you some really exciting opportunities. So first of all, I want to tell you all about the 2019 English Mastery Trial, and I'm now going to talk to you about how you can participate in the 2022 randomised control trial that we're currently recruiting for. Before I do so, a little bit of information about what English Mastery is, who we are, what we do. So we launched in ARC Schools. ARC Schools, a multi-academy trust, in 2014 with a focus on developing curriculum, professional development, assessment frameworks, implementation infrastructure to support schools to transform the way English was taught, assessed, and discussed across the ARC network. And since then, we found that with the successor program, we've scaled beyond the ARC network, and we're currently working with around 200 schools across the country. And in 2019, the Education Endowment Foundation ran an RCT into the program, and I'll share the findings of that shortly. So we are part of the ARC family. We are under the ARC Curriculum Plus umbrella, and important to know, we're a non-for-profit organisation, we're a charitable organisation, so everything we do in schools we do as a charity, and we work in partnership with schools to support their implementation of the curriculum. And in ARC Curriculum Plus, all of the ARC Mastery programmes, we have a common mission to empower teachers to give every young person the subject knowledge and skills that allow them to succeed. So we are all about that commitment to supporting teachers, empowering teachers to have the impact in the place where it matters the most, in the classroom. So why does English Mastery exist? Where do we come from? So back in 2014, as we were researching and developing the programme, we identified that in a lot of our schools, pass rates were good, we were getting lots of C pluses, but progress wasn't where we wanted it to be. A lot of those students who could go on to get B's, A's, A stars were stuck at that C threshold. We also saw lots of Key Stage 4 was spent making up lost ground from Key Stage 3. The students would start in year 10 and would say, oh my goodness, we've got such a long way to go. We've got to really go back over some fundamental concepts here. We also saw and continue to see the most experienced teachers, the most successful teachers deployed at GCSE. And as a result of that, we had a real lack of experience, expertise, contextual, historical knowledge around the curriculum, English teaching across Key Stage 3. So this is an illustrative curriculum map from a Key Stage 3 from one of an old art school, and we'd see real inconsistency. Perhaps the PGC placement student would write the first unit on autobiography. We might get that next one on a short story, The Landlady from a School Up the Road. We might have a dusty old theme park unit of work buried very far deep down on the T drive. And all of that had that patchwork approach. We saw a lack of continuity around the conceptualization and execution of what the curriculum should be, how students should graduate term to term, year to year, to build up that fantastic body of knowledge to allow them to be successful at GCSE, A level, and beyond, and to engage with that fabric, the way that English cuts through the fabric of society, cuts through kind of our culture. With all of those issues, we then adopted a research-based approach. And Jonathan mentioned the 4 pedagogical pillars, and they are rooted in education research. To give a little bit more context, we looked at subject domain, how we learn principles of cognitive science, how we learn to read and write, what are good assessment protocols, and what is actually misguided assessment protocols, as Jonathan alluded to with the notion of triple marking, and how can we establish a great training community to support that. So we drew on research colleagues, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with. So the work of people like Daniel Willingham, Rosenshine, cognitive load theory, Michael Young, Isabel Beck, Hart and Risley, Rector and Leslie, a really broad and rich research base that allowed us to draw on those intentions for our programme, right? The pedagogical pillars, which Jonathan alluded to, the notion of a knowledge-led approach to teaching English, the importance of teaching reading discreetly from writing as having those 2 independent curriculum strands, the importance of teaching Tier 2 vocabulary and how assessment can play a critical role in identifying gaps in students' learning and then closing those gaps in a timely manner and supporting them to make more progress quicker. So that was our journey through 2014, 15, 16, 17. In 2022, the principles of high quality teaching is the best way to mitigate against any kind of learning loss, learning decay, whatever you and your context may have experienced. And that is beautifully synthesized in the EEF's guidance around COVID-19 supporting schools with catch-up, although that's perhaps a misnomer. And we determined as an organisation to synthesize education research, to put it into practice and to support schools to implement that research in their own classrooms. And that continues to be the best and only way that there ever was in helping those students to make more progress than they ordinarily would. To do so, our programme includes that curriculum progression framework, a really clear understanding of how students graduate in success and skill and knowledge in English throughout Key Stage 3. And that is manifest in a range of lesson guidance, resources that are there for schools, a fantastic toolkit, bedrock, a foundation with which to inform their teaching. But a zip folder of lessons, of worksheets, isn't going to transform the way that the classroom practice, the impact of classroom practice has. We have to go alongside that a really comprehensive training and professional development program where we work intimately with schools to understand their context, to understand their students, their teachers, their own school improvement journey, to allow them to really own the English mastery curriculum as their own. It's not ARC's English curriculum, it's their school's English curriculum. And that is complemented with assessment materials so schools can be really confident that their students are making progress throughout the curriculum. I won't bore you, or perhaps I will. I won't make that assumption. Maybe I'm boring you anyway. But this gives you a detailed overview of the quantity, the extent of curriculum resources that we provide to schools. And this isn't to intimidate or impose, it's to illustrate just how comprehensive that is. And similarly, we often speak to schools and they say, yeah, I had a great summer holiday. I spent all of it writing 200 low stakes retrieval practice quizzes for my students. Fantastic. That is brilliant that the schools are engaging with that education research, but there's also a massive workload issue facing the sector at the moment. And anything we can do to support schools to change planning from a resourcing issue, I have to generate all this content, to a real planning and implementation activity. How can I make this curriculum content pop, sing, engage my students? That is one of the key drivers of improvement in English mastery. And again, to just demonstrate how responsive we are to schools and how closely we are attuned to the needs of the sector, schools often, like we really turned a lot of content around very quickly during COVID, and schools, again, really grateful for that responsive support. And similarly, it's hard to overemphasize the volume and the quality of the professional development that goes alongside the curriculum. But again, just an illustrative point, we were featured as a case study in the EEF's paper on effective professional development, and identified how we were really explicit about the kinds of knowledge we wanted our teachers to gain, and how we sequenced that knowledge and how we supported them to implement that knowledge in their own practice. So I spoke earlier about the 2019 EEF report. In 2019, the EEF wanted to run a randomized controlled trial where half the schools did English mastery and half were continued with their existing provision. And the idea of a RCT is to compare the difference in progress and attainment between the intervention group, those who did English mastery, and the control group, those who didn't. We had to suspend outcome measures, i.e. we weren't able to tell the impact we had on students due to the COVID disruptions, but we got some very insightful commentary around how teachers perceived English mastery and how teachers perceived English mastery had an impact on their own practice, on their workload, and on their students' performance in English. And these are really compelling. I think these are very compelling and very, very persuasive figures. So 74% of teachers felt English mastery improved students' grammar, 63 reading skills, 68 writing skills, and 75% of teachers said English mastery helped improve students' overall progress. Similarly, thinking about the curricular components of the programme, 89 said that our literature curriculum was quite or very effective, 73 saying that our writing curriculum was quite or very effective. And what else did teachers say about impact on them? Well, one really interesting figure here is 80% of teachers felt to reduce their planning and marking workload. And thinking again about the workload issues facing schools, thinking about what Jonathan was describing about how we can create space in a school's time and a teacher's timetable to implement something with fidelity and with those intelligent adaptations. A program like English Mastery is supporting schools and school leaders to do that. We're now recruiting for a new randomized controlled trial of English Mastery. We want to get those outcome measures. We're working with Sheffield Hallam University as the evaluators of the trial, and the aim of the trial is to assess the impact of that knowledge-rich curriculum on 2022's Year 7 cohort. It's a 2-year randomized controlled trial and will divide schools once again into the treatment group and a control group. The trial will evaluate the impact the programme has on 2022's Year 7 cohort, and with the volume of support that I've just described, and again, there's more. There's lots that I wasn't able to describe. Schools will pay £900 in Year 1 and £900 in Year 2 which is a phenomenal saving of over 80%. The control group, half the schools will be randomly allocated to the control group and won't receive the programme, but in recognition for their contribution to research and for participating in research activities, they'll receive a payment of £1,250 throughout the on completion of the data requirements throughout the 2-year trial. To be eligible, you need to be a state school, be non-selective, have a year 7 cohort in 2022 and a year 8 cohort in 2023. So that may make some middle schools ineligible. And you can't have delivered English mastery in your school in the past.